This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we'll start. Hello, everyone. I, CA Pranav Kapadia, welcome you all on behalf of APMH and Associates for this webinar on e-invoicing under GST. Well, friends, we have seen that once GST was introduced, or at the time of introduction of GST, there were various provisions and various scenarios which were going to develop in the sense that there was going to be a GSTR 1 coupled with a GSTR 2A being auto-populated, wherein the details of the invoices would be reflected. Then the GSTR 2 form was to be auto-populated, and then the final GSTR 3 return was to be filed. But those forms never came into being actually, and what we had was a stopgap arrangement by way of the GSTR 3B returns. In this course, various developments happened. There were technical glitches, and the way the GST law has developed, the way things developed, there were various issues in relation to fake invoices or wrong ITC being claimed. And the government had thought fit that yes, we should be having a standard format for invoicing under the GST regime, because although there is a provision which says that which are the relevant fields which should be there in an invoice, there is no standardization of invoice under the GST regime. And that is where this entire concept of e-invoicing is coming into play. Myself and Amlesh, we will be dealing onto the various aspects of e-invoicing. I will be going through, I'll be taking you all through all the provisions of for e-invoicing, why e-invoicing, and what are the issues involved. And Amlesh will be taking us through the practical aspects of how to generate the e-invoice, and we'll also try to give a live demo if possible of generating the e-invoice. So let's begin our journey for e-invoicing regime under GST. So this first approval of the council, when it came, it stated that electronic invoices will be started in phases, wherein the e-invoice portal would be made effective for B2B reporting of transactions from 1st of January 2020 on voluntary basis. This was for companies who were having a turnover of more than 500 crores of rupees. And then from 1st of February, the portal was to be open for companies with turnover more than 100 crores. And then from 1st April 2020, that was the date from which this e-invoicing was to become operational. But I think due to the system still getting full-fledged operational, and still the government wanting to give more trial opportunity to the business community, the GST Council has now proposed that the new system will be mandatory from 1st October 2020 for specified taxpayers. So the first question which clicks as it is that if the e-invoicing is not coming into effect from 1st April 2020, then why are we having this webinar, and why are we sitting in front of the scheme that if it is going to come from 1st of October 2020? Well, we should understand that these proposals are going to be applicable in such a manner that lots of changes would be required in the systems of reporting by an entity, and that is why, and to make the changes in the systems would require much more time, and that is why it is necessary to understand that how this e-invoicing concept would evolve, what would be the changes that would be required in the systems which will be have to be made by any enterprise, and of course be ready with the trial versions of it so that by 1st October 2020, when it actually comes in, we are ready for the e-invoicing era. Next. तो मुझे करना पड़ेगा, ओ पूरा उधर से है, keep it here, उधर से भी है, it's not happening. So basically, the first fundamental was that there was no standard for e-invoicing existing in the country. And after consultation with various trade industries bodies as well as ICA, after keeping the draft in public domain, a standard has been generated. So there will be the standard fields which will be mandatory for this e-invoicing. E-invoicing will be the responsibility of the taxpayer, who will be required to report the same to the invoice registration portal. So there will be separate invoice registration portal of GST, wherein this reporting is required, which in turn means the invoice registration portal in turn will generate a unique invoice reference number, that is the IRN number, and digitally sign the e-invoice and also generate a QR code. So basically this is a reporting requirement. Generation of e-invoicing is a reporting requirement. Where it is to be reported, it is to be reported on the invoice registration portal. The invoice registration portal will generate a unique invoice reference number, which is the IRN number. That invoice reference number with the invoice will the government will send a digitally signed e-invoice. So it will be an authentication by the government, and also it will be having the invoice which will be generated will be having a QR code of the invoice reference number and the invoice details. Having a standard is a must to ensure the complete interoperability of invoices across the entire GST ecosystem, so that e-invoices generated by one software can be read by other software, and thereby eliminating the need of fresh data entry, which is a norm and standard expectation today. So basically, what does this mean? The government wants that as of now all these data fields which are required in a particular invoice, say we require the details of seller, purchaser, GSTIN number, the invoice reference number, value, tax amount, tax rate, etc. So all these basic necessities which are there in invoice are there in every invoice. Maybe each company or each SSE is having a separate format. The company might be preparing the invoices today in a separate format. Some may be preparing through their softwares, some may be preparing through in Excel format, somebody in Word format, so on and so forth. There could be various formats, but there are the basic criteria or basic details which are required in an invoice are always there. And across the board, the government is not getting this information in a standardized format, and hence to ensure this standardization, the e-invoice formats are being introduced. The machine readability and uniform interpretation is the key objective. So the machine should be able to read that these are the parts of a particular invoice which is being issued, and this in turn will also be important for the reporting to the GST system as a part of the return. And of course, it will try and eliminate the data entry errors and duplication of data, which again and again is required. We will see how it will eliminate these errors as well as avoid deduplication. So what has the government done? The government has come out with 5 notifications to make e-invoice mandatory. All these notifications, notification number 68 to notification number 72 of 2019, were issued by the government in December 2019, and this e-invoicing was made mandatory. However, as mentioned earlier, the 39 GST Council on 14th March 2020 decided that the date of implementation for e-invoicing and the QR code is to be extended to 1st October 2020. Let's understand one thing: the QR code which is mentioned over here is different from the QR code which will be printed on the e-invoice. We'll come to what is this QR code separately. Okay, so what would be the benefits of e-invoicing? Of course, it will have better taxpayer services. There will be a one-time reporting of the B2B invoice data in the form it is generated. Basically, if we try to understand how this e-invoicing is going to function, all business to business transactions, the information of the basic details which will be printed on the e-invoice will be reported to the IRP. From the IRP, with the IRN number, the invoice will be generated. That information is going to flow into the GSTR1 returns in the new format, basically in Annexure 1 and Annexure 2 of the new return formats. The data is going to flow, and that will help to generate a pre-populated data in both these annexures. And this will help in preparing the e-way bill also. The basic information which is going to be generated will help in generating the e-way bill also, which can be used from the e-invoice data. Basically, it will become a part of the business process, because as of now, as and when the invoices are being prepared, all this information is available with the seller or the supplier. The same information would go to the IRN, would go to the IRP, that is the invoice registration portal. A hash will be generated. That hash will be printed on the normal invoice, which is to be issued by the taxpayer. So here the question comes that, okay, will the e-invoice which is going to be generated will be the final invoice, or does the supplier has the option of having his own invoice and mentioning the IRN number on his own invoice and in its own format? I think that is going to be a very important question, that whether the e-invoice generated on the portal alone will be the final invoice, or the normal invoice which is prepared by the dealer can still be continued with a reference of the IRN number which is generated on the IRP portal being mentioned on the normal invoice. According to me, the normal invoice can still continue, and the IRN number which will be generated on the portal can be mentioned on the normal invoice which is being prepared by the dealer as of today. The e-invoicing will also reduce tax evasion, because there will be a complete trail of B2B invoices, right from generation of the invoices till mentioning them in the e-way bill, to mentioning them in the Annexure 1 and Annexure 2 of the proposed new GST returns. It will also help in system level matching of input credit and output tax liabilities. Output tax liability of the supplier will also get auto populated out of the B2B part of it. Of course, all invoices are not required to be generated, but only B2B invoices are to be generated through the e-invoicing or reported to the e-invoicing portal. So the output tax liability qua that will also get generated, and the recipient will also be able to match his input tax credit, which will again get auto populated in the new return annexure 2. And tax evasion, reduction in tax evasion by way of elimination of fake invoices, because the government wants to catch hold of the invoices as and when they are being generated, and I think this e-invoicing portal, the tagging and tracking of all these invoices will become much easier for the government to identify fake invoices. Today, such invoices they are able to unearth maybe after a few months or maybe a year or so after these transactions have taken place. But now it will give the government an edge to identify them much earlier. So what is e-invoice and its workflow? E-invoice does not mean generation of invoice by the computer system or the tax portal. It means reporting of the data. The invoice, as per Rule 48.4, which is the newly introduced rule, it shall be prepared by including such particulars contained in Form GST INV01 after obtaining an invoice reference number, by uploading information contained on the Common Goods and Services Tax electronic portal. So the separate electronic portal, the IRP, will be the portal in which the invoice reference number will be generated, and that is what the e-invoice will be. The e-invoice will be the invoice with the entire requirement as per Rule 46, and will have the invoice reference number generated from the Common Goods and Services Tax electronic portal. It means that the normal invoice which is prepared by the dealer, all the information and details of that would be there. In addition to that, The IRN number which will be generated through the invoice registration portal will also have to be mentioned on the normal invoice of the dealer. Further, the steps involved for generation of e-invoice which are to be followed in sequence are as under. Once we go through these steps, I think the things will be much clearer of how these e-invoices will be generated. First of all, the normal invoice which is to be generated by a taxpayer in its accounting or billing software, that will be generated by the dealer. Creation of a JSON file of the same to upload it on the invoice registration portal. JSON file will be created which will contain the specified particulars for e-invoices, and that JSON file will be uploaded on the IRP. Once the JSON file is uploaded on the IRP will validate it, apply QR code and digitally sign and generate the invoice reference number. That signing of invoice is required by the rules notified by Government of India. A placeholder for digital signature has been added in the e-invoice schema, and hence if a signed e-invoice is sent to the IRP, the same will be accepted. Here, what the government wants to tell us that you can issue a normal invoice, a regular invoice as you have been issuing today, and mention the IRN number. This is one option given. The second option is you can put in all the data which you are having in your existing invoice. You can add those fields in the schema which is provided by the government for generating the e-invoice. You can also apply your digital signature in that schema, and then the e-invoice which is generated from the invoice registration portal, that itself can become your final invoice. So here this is an option which is given to the dealer of generating and a full-fledged e-invoice from the invoice registration portal itself. So here integrating of the systems, the number of fields, because every business would have different types of fields in their in the invoices which are generated by them. A manufacturer would have different fields, a trader would have different fields, they would have lesser fields possibly. A service provider could have further lesser fields in its invoice. But in case each of them want to generate the full-fledged e-invoice from the invoice registration portal itself, then the option is available to the dealer. A question which comes immediately is that, okay, I always apply my logo. I always apply my logo on my regular invoice. The logo of my company is printed on my invoice. Will the logo also get printed on the e-invoice generated on the invoice registration portal? The government in its FAQ have mentioned that logos file cannot be uploaded into the schema, nor it can go into the invoice registration portal. So the invoice which will be generated through the e-invoice portal cannot contain the logo of the company. So here a decision will have to be taken by the company that whether it wants to. So now the decision could be whether the logo is required by the company for issuing its regular invoice. If you feel that the logo is required for us, or if the invoices are being printed on pre-printed stationery, then the taxpayer may not opt for the e-invoice generated from the e-invoice from the invoice registration portal. They can generate the normal invoice and mention the IRN number which will be generated on the e-invoice portal. So here the options will have to be worked out by the taxpayer, and a decision will have to be taken by them. And in case the softwares of the companies are required to be amended, a decision will have to be taken accordingly, whether to route these invoices through third-party software, or they want to route it through their existing software, or whether there should be a connector which will connect the invoice being generated from the existing software system, which will connect to the invoice data being uploaded onto the IRP and the IRN being generated. So I think here the businesses will have to take a call that what is the system they want to implement, and in case the softwares are required to be amended or to be modified, then that is going to require time. The schemas have been provided on the GST portals, and they are available with the dealer. The QR code will be provided on uploading the invoice to the IRP. Seller must print the QR code on the printed invoice. So the IRN number will be also generated. The QR code will also be provided, and which will have to be printed on the invoice. Once the invoice is digitally signed by the IRP, it becomes an e-invoice, and the same will be sent to the supplier and the recipient by the IRP on mail. Correct? So if a e-invoice data, as soon as the e-invoice data is signed by the IRP, the government approves, okay, the data, the schema, the validation fields, the basic information which is required to generate the e-invoice. Once that data is available and the e-invoice is generated, it is digitally signed. The e-invoice will be sent to the supplier also, and also to the recipient by IRP on mail. It would also be reflected in the invoice registry of the GST portal and in the e-way bill system. So this data will be available in the invoice registry of the GST portal and the e-way bill system. We need to understand that the maximum number of line items supported per invoice is 100. So if you are having, say, 100 products, up to 100 products can be mentioned on the e-invoice. If the products are more than 100 or there are more than 100 line items which are being sold in one invoice, then the maximum number of line items would be restricted to 100. So that needs to be kept in mind. Then the basic question always comes that there are discounts, etc., being given. So say the product is sold for 10,000 rupees and there's a discount of 10%, which is mentioned on the invoice. Will the e-invoice capture that? The answer is yes. The e-invoice has a provision for capturing discount. The e-invoice also has an option for capturing other charges. Say if freight is being added, I am selling my goods for 10,000 rupees plus 1,000 rupees freight charges are being added in the freight, and other charges are being added in the invoice. So the e-invoice has the fields for capturing discount and reducing it, or capturing the other charges and adding it to the bill value. Of course, the one more question which comes is the seller can provide the address and bill to party and PAN details in the invoice. So the bill to ship to invoice information is also captured for the e-invoice, because in many cases the invoices are being generated on bill to ship to basis. Sometimes the party of bill to and ship to are same, and sometimes they are different. But that so that facility is also available on the e-invoice portal. The IRP system, after registering the invoice, will share back the digitally signed invoice for record of the supplier. Of course, it will come. Then one more question which comes up, that who can request for the IRN or the e-invoice. The e-invoice request can be made only by the supplier of the goods or services and not by the recipient of the goods or services. But the only point is that this IRN number, in case if the goods are being moved from say Mumbai to Delhi, and if there is a mobile squad which is operating and they want to check the invoice and with the e-way bill, they will be able to check the IRN number through their RFID, and through that RFID they'll be able to check that the goods are being sent through the e-invoice which has a valid IRN number. So the officers will be able to clearly check on this. E-commerce operators can also request the IRN on behalf of the supplier. Only thing is that the e-commerce operator should have registered on the GST portal accordingly. So if there are transactions which are happening by a taxpayer through a e-commerce operator, and if the e-commerce operator wants to view the invoice which is registered on the invoice registration portal, the e-commerce operator will have to make some additional registration on the GST portal, and with the rights thereon, they will be able to view the IRN. So this is basically the process flow of how the invoices will be generated, the e-invoices. So the seller first of all uploads the e-invoice JSON file to the invoice registration portal. So once the JSON file is uploaded on the IRP, the e-invoice registration portal, yeah, let's understand one thing, that there are 10 to 11 different portals on which this e-invoices will be generated, because people are worried today. If I'm trying to file my return, the portal says more than 1,50,000 logins are there as simultaneously, and hence you cannot log into the portal. And I know many of the accountants and many of the tax professionals who are filing the GST returns, they are really worried at how and when the returns will get filed. So those were the returns which contain the summary data. But these are the transaction details. So if a return contains details of 10,000 bills being issued, here each of those 10,000 bills will have to be uploaded on the system. So we can understand the load which the system will have to take, and hence the government has made 11 different portals on which they are all e-invoice portal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is how various portals have been made, and the invoices which will have to be generated through each of these respective portals. To which portal to apply, I think the systems will take care of themselves, that on which portal a particular person will have to upload his JSON file, whether on e-invoice portal 1, portal 2, portal 3, portal 10. So I think further guidelines will be issued that on which portal the e-invoice will have to be generated. So what happens? The e-invoice portal generates the hash, that is a 64-digit number. The hash is a 64-digit number, and that is the crux of the entire IRN, invoice reference number. It validates the hash. The portal will validate the hash, does deduplication check with the GST system. Now, what is this deduplication? Say if invoice number 10 has been issued twice and uploaded on the portal, or already invoice number 10 has been generated by the same GST IN holder, and there is one more uploading of the same invoice number on the same date which is being uploaded, then there will be a duplication of an invoice, and the system will be able to check that and throw an error. The system will sign it with the signature, add the QR code, this we have already mentioned earlier, and send the e-way bill to the system, and send to the e-way bill system also. So the basic data will also get generated in the e-way bill system. The e-way bill system, of course, the taxpayer will have to log in separately to the e-way bill portal. Only thing is, this information would be readily available. The basic fields which are required, those fields would be readily available in the e-way bill portal, and again the data entry part of it would get reduced to that extent. I think the software systems will have to be integrated properly if a person really wants to take advantage of this e-invoice portal and save on time and energy in not duplicating the data, the same data again and again. I think the systems should be enabled and made applicable in such a manner that all this becomes easier and flexible for the taxpayer. The hash which is generated by the invoice registration portal will also be stored in the GST invoice registry. So the e-invoice portal, the e-invoice register is separate, the GST system is separate. The hash which is generated on the e-invoice portal will also get stored on the GST system. Again, the deduplication will be checked. The GST system now has the unique invoice with a unique number, and that will go and get placed into the annexure 1 of the seller and annexure 2 of the buyer. Now, what are these annexure 1 and annexure 2? Well, we know that as on now we have the GSTR 1 return. The new GST returns which were envisaged to be implemented from 1st April 2020, those new returns have the annexures 1 and annexures 2, and the annexure 1 is similar to what we have as GSTR 1 today. Annexure 2 is the purchase data of the buyer, which will also get auto-populated. This is similar to what was originally envisaged as GSTR1 and GSTR2 returns. But only thing is now it is going to be a single return with Annexure 1 as details of outward supplies, Annexure 2 as details of inward supplies. Both will get auto-populated. So this invoice which is generated, it will in the annexure 1 of the supplier, it will go and get placed into the annexure 1 of the supplier. Simultaneously the same invoice information will go and get placed into the annexure 2 of the buyer. Now can the buyer view the system? The answer is yes. The buyer who receives the registered invoice from the IRP can view the ITC related to this invoice in his annexure 2, and he can use the QR code to verify the invoice. So once the buyer receives the invoice, he can view the QR, through the QR code he'll be able to check that the invoice has been issued to him. And basically I think the buyers are more worried about the input tax credit, whether they'll get or not. And I think with this on almost real-time basis, the buyer will be able to check the e-invoice which is generated by the seller. Of course, we need to keep in mind all other provisions of section 16 of the CGST Act regarding the invoice should be supported by receipt of goods, payment of tax by the seller, etc. All these things, of course, will remain and will continue. This is only the e-invoicing process that we are looking at, and the buyer will be able to view the credit. Yes, what type of documents are to be reported back to the GST system? Of course, the invoice is to be reported, the credit note and debit note. So credit note, debit notes can also be reported through the e-invoice portal. Export would also require e-invoice compliance. So on the e-invoice portal, 4 types of transactions are mandatory. All B2B transaction, business to business transaction. If I'm selling to a person who is having a GSTIN number, I have to generate a e-invoice. It is not mandatory for B2C transactions, but it is mandatory for all B2B transactions. I can issue, or rather the taxpayer will have to issue the credit notes and debit notes also through the e-invoice portal. Which are these credit notes and debit notes? These are the tax debit notes and tax credit notes, and not the financial debit notes and credit notes by the system. The export would also be required. The export would also require e-invoice compliance. The exports would cover not only the physical exports out of the country, but if supplies are made to SEZs or other, all zero-rated supplies would get covered by this e-invoicing. So the SEZ supplies, anyways, the SEZ units are registered in with the GSTN portal, and they have a GSTN number. So basically, all supplies which are zero rated, or rather all supplies to SEZ would anyways be covered by the normal B2B supplies. So that would also get reflected. The exports would also be required to be. So all exports and all SEZ supplies will get reflected on the e-invoice portal. There are certain dealers who are having B2B transactions. These dealers who are having B2B transaction, but the tax is not payable by the person making the supply. The tax is payable by the person who is receiving the goods on reverse charge basis. But if the supplies are B2B, then such supplies where the recipient of the supply is required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, such invoices will also have to be uploaded onto the system by the supplier. For example, a GTA, or we can take the example of sponsor, because GTAs are anyways are going to get exempted as per the 39th GST Council meeting decision. But we can take the example of sponsorship. Say in case of sponsorship, the tax is payable on reverse charge basis. So the person who is issuing the invoice for the for sponsorship charges received by him, the recipient in most of the cases is liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. So such recipient of sponsorship services will have to also upload the e-invoice on the IRN on the IRP. Okay. The next question which comes up is, when the goods are sold on approval basis, whether the e-invoice will be required to be generated at that point of time, or when the goods are sent for job work, or where I'm sending the goods to my branch from Mumbai to Pune. I have a branch in Mumbai, I have a branch in Pune. Then whether I as a taxpayer am required to generate the e-invoice, the answer is no. The goods can still be sent on delivery challan. Here again, we have to keep the basic principles of issuing the invoice in mind. When the dealer is required to issue a normal invoice or a tax invoice, then all the other rules of time of supply, that is section 12, section 13, and section 31 of um, invoice of the raising the invoice, whatever provisions are applicable in general, those provisions would remain in place. So if the goods are going on approval basis on a delivery challan, then the e-invoice is not required, because the invoice itself is not required to be prepared at that point of time. So if the invoice is required to be prepared, the e-invoice is required to be prepared. If the invoice is not required to be prepared and goods are going on a delivery challan at that point of time, then the e-invoice will not be required at that point of time. Well, then the various modes are given. It is web-based on the portal, or it can be through a API, application protocol interface. So the invoice can be generated through a API-based data, SMS-based, mobile app-based. Government is trying to come out with that. Let's see how the invoice will be generated on that. Offline tool, so there will be offline tool wherein all the data can be punched in and then uploaded, like we upload a JSON file onto the system on that page, or it could be on GSP basis, where there are GST Suvidha providers who will be having access to the API, and which will be a third-party software, and we can upload the invoice through such GSP based software companies, and through them the e-invoice can be uploaded. So all these modes are available for uploading the e-invoice. What if e-invoice is not prepared by the taxpayer to whom e-invoice is applicable? It is going to be mandatory. So wherever the invoice is required to be prepared, the e-invoice would be required to be prepared, and unless the e-invoice is prepared, the basic invoice which is prepared, say you are preparing a normal invoice and sending it to your customer, and you are not mentioning the IRN number, and if the dealer says I have prepared the invoice and I am sending it to my customer, that invoice will still be considered to be a invalid invoice. That will not be a valid invoice. The IRN number is mandatory, e-invoice is mandatory. So apart from your regular invoice, the e-invoice is mandatory. So the regular invoice will become invalid in case the e-invoice is not issued. All the consequences of supply without generating an invoice may apply. Yeah, so apart from that, so basically the invoice becomes an invalid invoice, and whatever penalties are prescribed for not issuing the invoice, that would also be become applicable. There could be penalty, there could be detention of goods. All those provisions will also apply as if the invoice has never been issued. Which class of registered person is notified for generation of e-invoice? Registered persons whose aggregate turnover in a financial year exceeds 100 crore rupees shall be required to prepare e-invoice in terms of section 48, rule 48.4, in respect of supply of goods or services or both to a registered person. So every company whose turnover exceeds 100 crore as of now has been made liable to generate the e-invoice. Down the line, it would come to other companies also, but as of now, the government is going to start it with the companies who are having turnover more than 100 crore rupees. The question is here, the section, the rule mentions that whose aggregate turnover in a financial year exceeds 100 crore. So if there's a company which has overall turnover on on all India basis of say 150 crores, but in and is having multiple branches in various states, and all of its branches are having a separate GST and number, then whether each of those branches will be required or only the HO will be required. Say if the company is registered in 5 states and each of those states are having a turnover of 30 crore rupees, then whether none of them will be required to generate the e-invoice or all of them will be required to generate the e-invoice. From what is mentioned over here, they mentioned that the registered person whose aggregate turnover in a financial year exceeds 100 crores. So basically, aggregate turnover speaks of turnover on all India basis for the same PAN number. So if in one PAN number or turnover exceeds 100 crore rupees, then all such branches will have to generate the e-invoice. So in this example, all the 5 branches, although their turnover is 30 crores each of those 5 branches will be required to generate the e-invoice. So I think this we have already covered up. So if the turnover is less than 100 crore, e-invoice is not required. Then one more question which has been answered in the FAQ is that if there is a receiver who is having turnover more than 100 crores, but a supplier whose supplier is having a turnover less than 100 crores. Say supplier company A is having turnover of 50 crores and supplier company B and recipient company B is having turnover of 150 crores. Then whether the supplier A in this case will be required to generate the e-invoice, the answer is no, because it's applicable only to the supplier of service and not to the recipient of services. As I stated earlier, the e-invoices which are to be generated, certain concessions have been given to certain class of registered persons by the 39th GST Council meeting, which was held on 14th March 2020. So the insurance companies, banking companies, financial institutions, non-banking financial institutions, goods transport agency and passenger transport service, etc., will not be required to generate the e-invoices. Notifications for this is yet to be released. So once this is released, we'll get the exact category. So these are the proposed class of registered persons who will not be required to generate the e-invoice. These are the various sites where the e-invoice can be generated: www.einvoice1.gst.gov.in. So there are 10 various sites wherein this e-invoice can be generated. The minimum contents, I think this we have already discussed earlier. Details of supplier, date and serial number of invoice, details of recipient and consignee, type of supply, that is whether the tax invoice, credit note, debit note, item wise details of the supply, and HSN wise details will also be required to be generated on the e-invoice portal with the authorization and signature. The IRN number which is going to be generated, we just need to understand in this slide is that it will be a 64 character number. So which will be having a length of 64. The IRN is of 64 characters length, and this is a unique number in the GST system, irrespective of the taxpayer, financial year, and document type. So this is going to be a unique number. It is a 64-digit number. We really need to understand how the 64-digit will be able to copy paste into the system from where we are going to issue our regular invoices. So our software systems, if we are going to generate the IRN through the software system, then the field length of the invoice will also have to be kept in such a way that this entire IRN gets reflected and printed in the system. And the IRN is the hash of the supplier GSTIN, the financial year, the document type, and the document number. Is furnishing of quick response code mandatory in e-invoice? So the registered persons whose aggregate turnover in a financial year exceeds 500 crores shall issue invoice containing the QR code in case of supply made to unregistered. So if a registered person having turnover exceeding 500 crores is issuing an invoice to an unregistered person. Basically, it is talking of B2C supplies. Then a QR code will have to be generated by the person issuing the invoice. This QR code is different from the e-invoice QR code which will be generated by the government, and that will contain the details of the IRN number, etc., which will be created by the government. As far as the sales to unregistered person are concerned, the supplier, the dealer who is selling to unregistered person will have to himself generate the QR code for all its B2B supplies. This was also going to become mandatory from 1st April 20, but has been extended till 1st October 2020. How many copies of e-invoice need to be generated? Well, the normal invoices need to be generated in triplicate for sale of goods. They need to be generated in duplicate for provision of services. But if the e-invoice is generated, then the duplicate and triplicate copy will not be required, and that is the amendment which has been introduced in Rule 48, wherein Sub-Rule 6 has been added, which says that the provisions of Sub-Rules 1 and 2 shall not apply to invoice prepared in the manner specified in Sub-Rule 4, that is the e-invoice. So if the e-invoice is prepared, then a duplicate and triplicate copy will not be required to be generated. Yeah, as I told earlier, the time of supply of goods for generating an invoice in case of sale of goods or providing of services, the basic rules as per section 31, as per section 12, as per section 13 of the CGST Act, that would remain in their place, that would continue. The only thing is that the details for e-invoice which are required to be reported on the invoice registration portal, the reporting requirement will be an additional requirement which will have to be adhered to. Will businesses now be required to generate e-invoices on the GST portal or the IRN portal? This is one of the FAQ wherein the government has stated that no, businesses will continue to generate e-invoices on their internal systems, whether ERP or their accounting or billing systems or any other applications. So here I think if we want to use the e-invoice which is generated through the IRP, the fields have been provided by the government. If we try to see the schema has 89 fields. So basically they cover entire A to Z of whatever billing pattern or concern would be there. But only 11 fields have been made mandatory, which are required to be mentioned in the e-invoice. All other fields are options. So as a business entity, if you want to add or delete or modify any other field which are required, all those fields can be added onto the system as and when required. And e-invoice can be generated from the e-invoice registration portal. But again, the business will have to evaluate whether they want to have an invoice which is generated through the e-invoice portal or only take the IRN number and mention it in their existing e-invoice or existing invoice billing software, invoice billing software. The GST portal or IRP will not provide facility to generate invoice. It is only to report the invoice data. Only thing is that if the entire data is mentioned therein, it will be able to print and provide all the fields which are there. Will there be separate invoice formats required by traders, professionals and contractors? The same e-invoice schema will be used for all kinds of businesses. The schema has mandatory fields and non-mandatory. As I said, there are total 89 fields, out of which 11 are mandatory and the rest are non-mandatory fields. Mandatory fields will have to be filled by all the taxpayers, and non-mandatory fields is an option. Yeah, of course, it covers all the business needs. The schema which have been prepared, those 89 fields are very elaborate. So every type of transaction would get covered into the schema which is prepared for the e-invoice. Regarding the logo, I already mentioned earlier, logo cannot be placed into the software. Logo cannot be mentioned on the e-invoice. Will it be possible for bulk uploading of invoices for e-invoicing as well? I think the facility as of now is not available. So at a time, single invoices will have to be uploaded. The IRP will be able to handle a large sequence of invoices for registration and validate them. essentially bulk upload will be required by large taxpayers, because that is going to, because where there are multiple invoices which are issued on one single day, bulk upload facility will be required. But I think that will have to be taken care of through the accounting system and through the connected software, so that multiple invoices get pushed into the system. There are 4 formats in which the invoices can be prepared. The e-invoice can be generated, and for that Amlesh is there with us. Amlesh will take us and guide through the next part of the e-invoicing system, that how the e-invoices are to be generated, and he will also show us the Excel formats, each of these formats of how the invoice will be generated, and we'll also try to give you a demo of the e-invoice being generated on the portal. Amlesh is there with me. I'll now request Amlesh to please join me and give us a demo of the e-invoicing. Amlesh, please join in, Amlesh.
Thanks, Pranav sir, for giving briefs on the legal perspectives, legal points, which now I will move on to give a demonstration on the on how we can generate the e-invoice through the portal, e-invoice portal, trial portal. Before that, I will like to go through a couple of slides. So they have come up with, the government has come up with the 4 formats: format A, format B, format C, and format D. So we'll look each formats when we'll go through the Excel template. Invoice. Okay, now there are certain slides which I will take. Now the question will arise in your mind whether if I have submitted a wrong details, wrong invoice on the GST portal, whether we'll be able to cancel that or not. The answer is that you can cancel such invoices which you think it's a wrong or is not required to be uploaded on the GST portal, and such cancellation has to be made within 24 hours from the generation of e-invoice. So if you now what if you forgot to delete or cancel within a 24 hours? So the IRP portal will have a data up to 24 hours. After that, it will wipe out your all the transactions which you have made within 24 hours. So such transaction will be auto populated in annexer 1 as annexer 1, which is a GST outward supply, and from there you have to delete such transactions. Now, is there any amendments is allowed? So there is amendment is allowed, but in such cases you have to again do the process which I have already discussed. You have to delete the existing one and add the another one in annexer 1. So now the question will arise whether what are the documents need to be carried during the transit of goods, whether e-way bill is still to be mandatory after the whether the e-way bill is still to be mandatory after coming of e-invoicing or not. So e-invoice will going to be e-way bill will continue to be the mandatory based on invoice values guidelines. So before going into the action template, I would like to go through certain errors. There are certain errors which are specified. We'll get into that later on. Now we'll go to the live demo. Website. First website. So for the trial, government had dedicated a software as e-invoice 1-trial.nic.in. You have to go through this site, and if you don't have any login, you have to first register, and this will allow only if your turnover exceeds 500 CR as of now. However, they have come with the clarification that they would allow for 100 crores also, but portal is still not allowing for those who are having less than 500 CR. So now we have to log. First, I'll go through the tools before login, because once you log in, it won't allow you to download the template. So you have to go through the help tab, here tools, and then click on the bulk generation tool. You find here there are 4 types of JSON preparation file for e-invoicing: Form A, Form B, Form C, and Form D. The Form A is nothing but it is required for all B2B transaction and export invoice in single sheet. Form B is nothing but the splitting of Form A into 2 sheets. One sheet will be having the invoice details, another sheet will be having the product details. Form C is nothing but all the details as available in Form A plus payment and reference details, which will be in multiple sheets, and Form D is nothing but the Form C, which will be available in a single sheet. Now let's download the form. So this is Form A. So here you have to fill 2 sheets only. However, it's having multiple sheets in the work file. So this is the master codes which you have to use in case of exports, and port in case of ports, basically in case of exports, and state code. The another one is sample, that is a demonstration what kind of details you are required to fill in each of the fields. That is a description about the format A, format B, what is format A and format B. And here you will notice that there is no description about the format C, because they are still working on the format C. See, yeah, this tool will be available shortly, the portal is showing, and same in case of Form D. Okay, so that is why the description for the format D, C, and D is not available in this set. This is the schema. Basically, these are the fields based on which your the details which you have filled in the profile and invoice it will be validated, and there are certain FAQs which shall be useful while preparing the invoice for the first time. So so if you go through the profile, this is nothing but the details you have to fill for the taxpayers. So seller details, the person who is generating the invoice is required to fill his own details, where seller GST and legal name, trade name, address, state, pin code, and email ID. And there are other 10 fields. Based on this, the fields will be auto-populated in the e-invoice tab. So if you are having the details of reverse charge, B2B transaction, then you have to put yes. If not, then you can put no. And accordingly, the details will be fields or columns will be made available in the e-invoice tab. So there are 10 points on which you have to put yes or no. Do you have, like the second one is, do you have e-commerce transaction, bill to ship to model, dispatch bill from and dispatch from transaction, supply of services barcode, export details, and e-way bill details. The new, this is the new forms. This has been changed couple of days back. Earlier it won't have the details of e-way bills. So if you go through this field, there's a field for the details of e-way bill part B. If you have a details of part B, that is the transporter details and vehicle details, LR details, then at the time of generation of e-way bill, e-invoice, then you can put all the details in the e-invoice template, and it will auto populate not only the part A, part B also. Just you need to then you need to go to the e-way bill portal and just click on the print to get your e-way bill. So now let's go one by one the fields, one by one all the fields. I have one already filled templates in which which I will go through. See, these are the details which I have mentioned over here, the details of the supplier, GST number, trade name, and all these things. Here I have mentioned mandatory all the fields. You have yes or no. If this transaction is not there, you can put no, and accordingly the details will be details will be in the e-invoice tab will be modified. So for the time being, I will put yes. so that you would be able to view all the fields. So the first three details are this is the transaction, what kind of transaction is related to for which you are generating the e-way bills. You have to select B2B, SEZ with payment, SEZ without payment, export with payment, export without payment, and direct export or deemed export, rather deemed export, merchant export, deemed export. And you have to select in second field whether it's a reverse charge or not. I'll select no. Here you have to mention e-commerce GSTN if you are if you are preparing the e-invoicing bill on behalf of the supplier which is selling their products through e-invoice. Selling their products or e-commerce operator, then e-commerce operator can put such details. Here you have to select tax invoice, credit note or debit note. The second field is the invoice number. This is already been generated, so I'll change it to 101. Document date. This is the document date which you will be giving to your invoice number. Invoice. Buyer details. GST number, buyer trade name if having different from the legal name. Place of supply, buyer address you have to mention. The asterisk mark fields are mandatory, which you have to fill. So I'm putting here the special character and I will check what will happen. So date will be in the DTMM YYYY format. Buyer pin, buyer state you can mention here also. Dispatch details. Here dispatch details. You are raising the invoice from HO, but your stock is lying somewhere, and from there you have to move your goods. So in such scenario, you have to mention the details from where you are dispatching the goods. Here, in case of bill to ship to model, you have to put all the details of ship to details. Here you have to mention the items details. This is serial number 1. You can have a multiple items, serial number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and number of till 100 line items you can add. Here you have to mention it's a service or what. HSN code, barcode if you are having quantity, all these things you can mention. So I have just mentioned the mandatory fields. So here you can mention the GST amount, rate, sales rate is if it is applicable. I'll put here the percentage symbol for your checking the validation of forms. So here you can mention sales if applicable and other charges if required. So the item total would be 11,800. You can mention the batch details also. Here you can mention again. So here UAB details, and in case of export, you can mention the export details also here. So now I'm saving it. Now we'll validate the file. So it is having some error, and error log will be generated, and it will be saved where your Excel file is saved. So it will be saved. See, my Excel file is saved here. This is the errors log. Special characters are not allowed in column 5H. So this is the error in column H. Here have used special character and so I have to remove and make AND, and again there would be a, now we'll again validate and check. So there is another error. You can again go to the log, error log, or you can just go to the column CD to check. Please enter valid tax rate in column AS. If you go to the column AS, I have marked the percentage symbol. You just need to remove percentage symbol. saving, and now it will validate. So this is validated, and I'll prepare the JSON file. So data is validated successfully, and only schema validation is done. So only schema validation is means it's verifying the contents which you are going to put in the invoice, whether this will meet the requirements as per Act and rules or not. So this will be saved here. So I'll go to that file. This is a JSON file which is generated at 5.9. So now we'll log in. Here you have to log in. Yes, a captcha object C F68. Log in, and there are 3 tabs. The first one is E-Invoice, second one is MIS reports, and third one is change of password. If you go through the MIS reports, it's still in process. The option is yet not available. It will be made available. And another one is E-Invoice is having 3 options: bulk, upload, cancel, and print. So we have to upload the JSON file. We'll go browse, this is the files. We'll upload. So there's a uploaded file log having the total number of invoices 1, total number of line item in a file 1, and invoice uploaded successfully 1. Failed, there's no failed transaction. So once you upload, you can download the Excel file also of the details. Excel file will contain the invoice number, invoice date, acknowledgement number, acknowledgement date, and IRN number. You go to the IRN number, it's having of 64 characters. So now you have to go to the again in the invoice field and go to the print. So here you can print based on acknowledgement number or IRN number. Say I have the acknowledgement number, so I'll copy that, we'll paste and go. The invoice is available, you can print this also. So this is the invoice, this is the IRN number. Acknowledgement number is nothing but the JSON file details which you have uploaded, and acknowledgement and when you have uploaded such JSON file. And this is the QR code, it is generated by the government only. And you'll go through the bottom, you'll find the data signature of government. So all the details are there: category B2B, document number, document date, seller details, purchaser details, HSN code, unit price, tax rate, bifurcation of tax, and other things. And you can also download the JSON files. And this JSON is nothing but the JSON file which is uploaded E-Invoice JSON file. So you can extract this to get the PDF files, but as of now there is no such utility provided by the government through which such JSON file can be extracted. It's like we are extracting the form 16 and form 16A in case of TDS return, which in which zip file is being extracted to the PDF files, but as of now there is no fields provided. So this is a demo. You can download such invoice, and such invoice will, if you want to cancel, you can click over here, put the put the invoice detail, and you can click here the reason, duplicate or mistake, and put remarks, and if you submit, this will be cancelled from the e-Waybill portal. So that's it with regards to invoice session. And if you have any queries and question, you can post it through email, and you can post it now as well, or you can post through email. Question in chat box.
Mr. Pranav, there, sir. Hello. Hi. Hello, Mr. Pranav is there?
Yeah, he is there.
1 second. Pranav sir, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Sir, you said that only except B2C invoice, everything is required to be through E-invoice, right? So what about
Yeah.
B2C invoice, sir?
B2C invoices are not mandatory for e-invoice registration.
Okay, then in that case, I need to maintain a separate series for E-invoice, though in serial number, sir.
Accordingly, actually, what they have mentioned in the is that whenever any B2B transactions are happening, they need to be taken up through the e-invoice. But still, if you generate a B2C invoice, it would take care. According to me, the system will GST and being a mandatory field, it will not take. Yeah, so Amnesh is pointing that GST and being a mandatory field, it is not going to take on the GST. Basically, the purpose is to cross match the input tax credit as of now in annexure 1 and in annexure 2. And if you see one of the differentiating point, then the point is that in case of exports, where the exports are being made on payment of tax, so where the exports are being made on payment of tax, the tax information thereon, if the dealer is going to take a refund out of those export invoices which are made on payment of tax, then the information thereon would be available on the portal and the government will be able to link that. Basically, B2C is not in their domain as of now.
So since I'm an account department handling the account department, I need to keep a track of B2C and E-invoices also, no, sir? Well, said
Correct.
E-invoice is not mandated for B2B. Other than B2C, everything E-invoice is applicable. So I just better
Correct.
we should start with a separate serial number for B2C. Is it advisable? What you suggest?
You can have a separate series. Yes, you can have a separate series.
Thank you, sir. And second thing, sir, for export, normally we are submitting the commercial invoice first, thereafter export invoice start. In that commercial invoice, do we need to generate a IRN?
No, commercial invoice, no. So basically, when you are generating the invoice, so this commercial invoice, what are you doing? You are sending this invoice for to the customs department for mentioning over there, or rather, it is only going to your customer.
No, we are
That commercial invoice.
For custom clear, they require the IRN number.
Pardon me?
If I submitting commercial invoice to my custom officer, that require the IRN number.
That will require the IRN number. So at that point of time, you will have to generate the IRN number and then issue the invoice.
Commercial invoice, no? The commercial invoice
Yes.
I'm talking.
Correct. So basically, what is going to happen when this invoice? Yeah, correct. So what is going to happen when this invoice is going to go to the customs department? They will require the IRN number. If the IRN number is not linked to that invoice, then the credit will not flow, and they will be linking it with the customs portal. Also, the IceGate portal also this will be linked. And when you give it to the customs department, you need to mention the IRN.
And one more thing, because you said where the e-invoice is not required. Suppose if I'm taking under approval, you correctly said approval, job work, branch transfer. Besides this, I'm taking some warranty or under CAMC, a service invoice. In that case, I'm not making because the bill itself is charged because I'm supplying goods because they are under warranty. I need to supply the material because we already covered the invoice price in our earlier invoice.
Correct.
Because this is simply a delivery of goods, free of cost.
Correct. So you will not be required to generate e-invoice for providing the warranty products at that point of time because there is not a supply which is happening at that point of time. So under your normal business scenario also, you would not be preparing an invoice while supplying the warranty products. Say there is a repair which is required in or a product which is to be replaced under warranty, then you are not generating the invoice at that point of time, right? So because it's an in-warranty product. So if it's going to be an in-warranty product and the normal invoice is not getting generated, the invoice is also not required.
Thank you, sir. And one more question, sir, because you said 100 crore aggregate turnover in financial year. Which financial year I should consider? Consider what item I should consider for aggregate turnover? Import, export, how I can reach to aggregate turnover? Suppose I'm not having any branch.
Aggregate turnover, it includes the export also.
Both export
So
and
in aggregate turnover, what it should be included?
Yeah, so for aggregate turnover, you need to see section 2, subsection 6 of the CGST Act, wherein the aggregate turnover has been defined to include all your exports, your exempt supplies, your nil rated supplies, all this, and interstate branch transfers will also be included in that, and the turnover of the on all India basis for all the GST and numbers taken together will have to be considered. In my example, which I had given earlier, say you have 5 branches in India, in
So
5
I
different.
got sir. That I understood.
Yeah,
No,
so
I'm
so
not
we
doing
are
a
doing all
branch.
India basis for the same pen.
Okay, sir. Okay.
पेन के अंदर जो आता है वो सब पेन नंबर के अंदर जो आता है वो सब
Yes.
तो एग्जीबिशन वगैरह रिलेटेड रहेगा तो एग्जीबिशन का होगा तो ओवरसीज
So
एग्जीबिशन
sometimes we are supplying goods under for exhibition, sir.
ओवरसीज
Overseas. That is under delivery. It's not so to build.
So
returnable basis
on returnable basis.
returnable basis exhibition for exhibition purpose.
Correct. So there also we are not preparing a normal invoice because the goods are going on a challan, and I think there's a circular also for sending goods on exhibition basis outside India, which says that invoice is not required to be prepared if the goods are coming back within 6 months. If they are not coming, then the invoice is required to be prepared. So if those conditions are met as per the regular provisions applicable, e-invoice is not required. Otherwise, e-invoice is required.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Pranabhai.
Thank you very much. Hope you all
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
by this e-invoicing and get prepared for it before it comes in.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, recording to save.
नहीं वो एक अपना अप्रूवल बेसिस पे गया समझो वो
Within
जो
6 months will
6
come back.
मंथ में अगर नहीं आया
Bill.
हम तो इनवॉइस
Ah.